There's something following me. All my life, I've had paranormal experiences, in every stage of life, and every home I've lived in. When I was a baby, my mom was taking a nap while I slept in my cot. She was half asleep when she saw a man walk into the room, take his cap off, and place it on the nightstand. Thinking it was my dad, she asked, "You're home from work early?" He never replied. When she opened her eyes, no one was there and no cap was set on the nightstand. When I was around 5 or 6 years old, I walked downstairs early in the morning before anyone was awake to get myself something to drink. Our old kitchen was a horrible orange color with these horrible sheer orange curtains that you could see through. When I walked into the kitchen, I saw a man or boy sitting on the windowsill, knees up to his chest. I could see him through the curtains, but not clear enough to see much detail. I remember running back up the stairs as fast as I could, jumping on top of my sister who was asleep. My mom and sister always remind me of that story and are shocked when I tell them I remember it vividly. My sister also reported that she used to hear one of the dining room table chairs scraping along the floor most nights when we were all upstairs in bed. When I was around 8, we moved to a new house. Few things happened to me there. The bathroom tap was one of those old generic taps that you have to twist to turn on. One day, I remember suddenly realizing that I could hear gushing water coming from the bathroom, which was next to my bedroom. When I investigated, I found the bathroom tap twisted all the way on, to the point where it took me a good 20 seconds to turn it off completely. I didn't see anyone go into that bathroom. I also had a reoccurring nightmare when I lived in that house, which I would dream about once every month or so. I only found this out recently, but my mother and sister both reported seeing a dark shadow moving across the wall on the upstairs hallway towards my bedroom and disappearing once it reached my open doorway. They reported seeing this separately on multiple occasions. One night, in that house, when I was around 10 years old, I had come back from a bike ride with my father around autumn time. A car had drove through a puddle and absolutely soaked both of us. My dad went to the kitchen to make himself a cup of coffee while I sat on the sofa to watch TV. Suddenly, I felt a chunk of my wet hair drop onto my shoulder, as if it had been picked up into the air. When I looked at it, I saw the chunk was slowly unraveling, as if it were twisted around someone's finger. Months later, I told my mom the story, to which she freaked out and told me how her father, who had died of cancer around a month before the incident, used to sneak up behind her and twist her hair as a child to make her jump. We moved to my current home when I was around 12. A lot of stuff went on in that house and I always felt a heavy presence. We had laminated flooring in our living room, and one night, while my parents were out shopping, I heard something being dragged slowly across the floor. I figured it must have been my cat pawing at a plug that was lying on the floor. We had a floor lamp which was almost always unplugged. I thought this up until my parents came home. When my mother opened the door, I heard her say, "Come on then, in you come." She was speaking to my cat, who had been outside the entire time they were out. I have had my feet scratched while I've been trying to sleep. I've heard loud, heavy footsteps walk through the kitchen in the middle of the day, thinking my dad had come home from work early. I've heard my mother call my name, cough, and sigh when she has not been home. I've seen black shapes moving towards me from the corner of my eye. I'm not sure if these incidents are unrelated or if I'm actually being followed by something specific. My mom is a believer in the spiritual practices, and she decided to practice smudging and saging. I wouldn't class myself as a Wiccan or pagan, but I definitely believe the practices to an extent. Ever since my mother saged the house, the experiences have stopped and I no longer feel a dark presence. I still have the odd experience every now and again, but I no longer feel haunted. I hope whatever may have been connected to me is gone for good. I live in a haunted house in Ireland. Make of this what you will. Back in 2009, Ireland was going through the recession, but I managed to buy a house. It was a nice cottage. It suited me perfectly as I was a single man. I did shift work, so it was nights and days, days and nights. Initially, I thought it was because I wasn't getting enough sleep, but things started happening to me within the house that I couldn't explain. For instance, one night, I was doing some ironing. I put a towel on the railing in the bathroom and went back into the kitchen to get some more clothes to hang and put away. I came back up and the towel that I had put on the bathroom railing was strewn across my bedroom floor. And my first thought was that there was someone in the house with me, so I ran back into the kitchen and grabbed the frying pan. It was a small house, so there was nowhere for someone to hide. After a while, I reasoned that it couldn't have been an intruder because the door was locked and all the windows were shut. It scared the life out of me, but I convinced myself that I just wasn't paying attention and that I might have actually left the towel in my room, even though I knew I didn't. But things got worse as time went on and couldn't be dismissed so easily. It got to the stage where I was actually afraid of being in my own home. For instance, coming in from work, particularly at nighttime. There was a light switch on the wall by the doorway. I'd have to switch that on before I'd even fully open the door. I was so terrified that I wouldn't even look into the darkness. Sometimes, when I'd open the door at nighttime, there'd be a gust of wind coming out from the house to greet me. But it eventually got to the stage where I was beginning to wonder if I was losing my mind. This went on for months. Things going missing, curtains being closed when I left the room and being partially opened when I came back in minutes later. The final straw was when I actually saw something. I arrived home one night at around 3 in the morning after being at work. I opened the hall door and switched on the light. Just to give you a picture of the layout of the house, it was quite small. There was a hallway, and down at the end of the hallway was a doorway to a bathroom that was out the back, and the kitchen was to the left. So, this night in particular, I switched on the light and opened the door fully to be greeted by what all I can say was a big man's shadow. And this thing was standing at the end of the hallway. Now, how it was a shadow is beyond me because there were 3 spotlights running down the hall and they lit up everywhere. But this shadow stood within the light and it was facing me. Every hair on my body stood on edge. The fright, the fear, and the panic was just so intense. I yelled out, "Leave me the fuck alone." And with that, whatever it was, it turned sideways and I could see the whole profile of its face. Then, there was this massive bang and a chair was sent flying up the hallway towards me. I legged it out of the house, got back into my car, and traveled back up to my parents' house. I was so distraught. I had a brother living at our parents' house at the time, and he thought that it had been an accident. I tried to explain to him as best I could what had happened. Now, I hadn't said anything to anyone about the goings-on of the house. I had been living in it for about 6 months, and it had been going on all that time. Almost every day, something happened. Being terrified in your own home is a horrible feeling. My brother and I drove back down to the house the following day, and we found the chair that had been thrown at me in the hallway on top of the kitchen table. I had a bottle of water in the fridge, and I took it out and placed it on the kitchen table. As my brother and I were talking, the bottle just burst. It was as if someone had shook a Coke can and opened it, spraying it everywhere. Every surface of the kitchen seemed to have water on it. I sold the house about 6 months later. During the months between putting the house up for sale and eventually selling it, strange things continued to happen within the house, like things going missing and curtains being moved. Thankfully, though, I never saw the apparition again. One night, I was lying in bed. It was about 1 a.m., and coming from the back of the house, I heard a woman's voice say, "No, doctor, please, help me." Petrified, I leapt out of bed and turned on all the lights. I searched everywhere, checked that the door was locked. It was, and the windows were all shut. The TV wasn't plugged in because it sometimes turned on by itself. Same for the radio, which was also unplugged. I'll never forget the sadness of her voice and the way she said it. I was so glad to be out of that house when I finally sold it. When I was living there, I asked a neighbor and he told me that the couple who I had bought the house off, the wife had been complaining about hearing things in the house. I don't know what I said or heard, but I do know that whatever it was definitely something that was in the house because I haven't experienced anything like that since then. I don't know whether the couple who bought the house off me experienced anything. I couldn't say. After all these years, I still don't talk about this with people as I don't want them thinking I'm crazy. But I know this happened to me.